Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and Dr. Sleep is the sequel to The Shining, an adaptation of Stephen King's 2013 sequel to his own Shining novel. This was a sequel that King wrote in part to fix what he disliked about Stanley Kubrick's 1980 masterpiece, The Shining. That's right, it's been a long, winding road to this Overlook maze that we now find ourselves in. But hey, it means we get to terrify ourselves with some nostalgic horror, so sign me up. This sequel follows Danny Torrance as an adult, and ironically, the story that King wrote in protest of Kubrick's work is loaded with Easter eggs and visual homages to Kubrick's work. Why? Perhaps because Stephen King has conceded that sometimes outsider interpretations of works are more entertaining than the original works themselves. For an example of this, go check out New Rockstars' breakdowns of the final season of Game of Thrones. I recently dove deep into Kubrick's The Shining with an insane analysis to thank our generous patrons for saving us from homelessness. If you're interested in watching that, which you should, it's my favorite breakdown that I've ever done, please consider becoming a patron yourself and hit that Patreon link in the description below. In this video, I'm going to go scene by scene throughout Dr. Sleep to point out all the interesting Easter eggs and Shining parallels that the director snuck in there. Spoiler warning, if you haven't seen Dr. Sleep or The Shining yet, let's get started. From the opening frames, director Mike Flanagan, known for his work in The Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, set out to make a full love letter to Kubrick. The Warner Brothers logo appears under the notes of Rachel Elkind and Wendy Carlos's iconic synth score for The Shining, notes that they adapted from the Gregorian chant Dies Irae, Day of Wrath, a funeral song. And then, just like The Shining's opening shots, we get our first of many aerial shots in Dr. Sleep. This one pointed directly down at a campsite in 1980. The young girl, Violet, is lured in by Rose the Hat, leader of a cult of vampire-like quasi-immortals called the True Knot. They feed on the steam released by those with the shine. See, in Dr. Sleep, Stephen King built on an already complex mythology that included ghosts and individuals with a psychic shine who can see those ghosts. Now, in addition to that, we got super old steam suckers. Just go with it. Rose's attack seems very similar to other classic horror kid snatchings. Rose lures in Violet with a flower and a magic trick, similar to how Pennywise lures Georgie close with his paper boat so that he can feed on him. Also, this whole waterfront flower exchange evokes the classic moment in the movie Frankenstein. Moving on to the Overlook Hotel, which appears with a hexagonal pattern on screen that turns into the famous second-level carpet pattern. In Danny's memory, he pedals his big wheel past room 237, and this time, the door creaks open, with the rotting woman inside creepily looming in from the blackness. Ugh. Considering Kubrick's Shining never really explicitly showed the inside of that room from Danny's perspective, this shot seems to deny the many conspiracy theories about what actually happened to Danny in that room, including the theory that Jack sexually abused Danny in there. So after moving to Florida, Danny remains haunted by that woman in the tub. He sucks his thumb in terror, just as he did as he walked up to Wendy after the experiences in room 237 in The Shining. Wendy here is played by Alex Esso, who does a pretty solid take on Shelley Duvall, though I think at one point they sampled archive audio of Duvall gasping, "Danny!" Danny meets with the ghost of Dick Halloran, who elaborates on his story of shining with his grandmother to reveal that he had an abusive grandfather, just like Danny's father. He warns Danny to trap any ghosts who haunt him inside a box in his mind. Danny's mind is depicted here as the snowy hedge maze of the Overlook Hotel, extending Kubrick's metaphor of the maze as a projection of the mind. Jack getting lost in the maze reflected him losing his grip of sanity. Danny storing these inner demons in that maze reflects him burying his past. Flanagan uses several drawn-out cross dissolves to transition from scene to scene, paying homage to Kubrick's cross dissolves and superimpositions throughout The Shining. After an adulthood of alcoholism, Dan moves to a small town in New Hampshire and gets a job working for Billy Freeman in the town's teeny town. It's a miniature duplicate, just like the miniature version of the Hedge Maze in the Overlook lobby. This is meant to show how Dan is unable to run from the Overlook. He keeps finding himself trapped back in these visual echoes of the hotel. My favorite example of this in Dr. Sleep is Dan's interview in the office of John Dalton, Dan and Billy's AA group leader. This set is an exact replica of Mr. Ullman's general manager office in the Overlook in The Shining, down to the famous impossible window behind him. Just like Jack, Dan is destined to stay in the Overlook forever and ever and ever. A long cross dissolve ends on Dan mopping, just like a cross dissolve early on in The Shining. Now working as a hospice worker, Dan has found a calling of using his shine to help the elderly pass on. The first man he does this for is in room 217, a nod to King's novel in which it was room 217, not 237. Dan also forms a psychic friendship with a young girl, Abra.
Who's that Pokemon! It's Abra!
Abra witnesses the True Knot feeding on a boy and uses her shine to track Rose, linking with her in a grocery store. At one point, the word dairy is right over Rose's shoulder. Obviously not the same spelling as Dairy, Maine, the setting of it in a number of King's stories, but I'll count it as an Easter egg. Dan is also linked here, and then he mentions Tony, his imaginary friend from his childhood in The Shining. In King's novel, Tony is actually Danny's adult self from the future warning him. And now when Dan asks Tony for help, no one responds because Dan never grows older. When the elder member of the True Knot starves to death, Rose comforts him by reminding him of his super long life, outliving civilizations. She mentions skyscrapers, which could be a nod to a really dark subplot in the Dr. Sleep book, in which Abra as a toddler predicts the 9/11 attacks, and the True Knot visits Ground Zero to feed off the steam of the victims. Abra's family house number is 1980, the year The Shining was released, and the wall that Dan and Abra use to talk breaks into the word murder, reflecting as red rum in Dan's mirror. Now this is the opposite of the way the mirror was used in The Shining. Danny wrote red rum on the door, and the mirror reflected its true meaning, murder. So it's reversed here to remind Danny of the truth in the mirror reflection, that truth being red rum, the nonsense word he wrote on the door in the Overlook, showing him the place he must eventually return. Dan and Abra head to the Overlook to trap Rose. Mike Flanagan actually reused the exact footage of Kubrick's opening aerial shots of Glacier National Park, rendering them now to look like it's nighttime with falling snow. This film also throughout resamples Shining music editor Gordon Stainforth's chilling sound design with the echoing chants and high-pitched shrieks. Dan's stroll through the hotel is shot in the same camera movements that Kubrick used. Steadicam tracking shots, slow dollies. He's framed just as his father was through the crack in the door, and then he literally follows in his father's footsteps to the gold room where, just like his father, he looks directly into the camera and finds Lloyd the bartender, except it's not Lloyd from before, it's the man who's always been the caretaker here, Jack Torrance. Now, Jack is not played by Jack Nicholson. Here he is played by Henry Thomas, collaborator of Flanagan from The Haunting of Hill House, and he's so grown up from playing Elliot in E.T. Dan struggles against the whiskey temptation, linking his alcoholism with his father's. Now, Kubrick's Shining very much downplayed the role of alcoholism in Jack's violent rampage, whereas Stephen King's version was very much focused on the whole themes of alcoholism and its links to family violence. Dan and Abra try to trap Rose in the Colorado Lounge by Jack's old Adler typewriter, hoping to lock her in another maze box. Instead, Rose stalks Dan up the stairs, mirroring the way Jack stalked Wendy up the stairs. Now from here, the Shining references kind of hit us over the head, right? There's the Grady twins, the Room 237 woman, Horace DeWint, Delbert Grady. They all show up to consume Rose. They get their fingers under her skin. It's kind of gross, but awesome. Though there's no sign from that creepy bear costume man. It all ends with Dan overheating the boiler to burn down the hotel, which is actually how Stephen King's Shining novel ends. Dan's ghost continues to visit Abra, encouraging her to shine on. These final words date back to Stephen King's inspiration for the term The Shining, John Lennon's song Instant Karma, aka We All Shine On. These words ring in our mind as the credits close out with the perfect song choice, Midnight the Stars and You, the closing song from The Shining. You remember. Do you think the Dr. Sleep film was a worthy Shining sequel? Comment down below with your thoughts. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @EAVoss, and follow New Rockstars and socials at New Rockstars, and subscribe to us on YouTube for breakdowns of everything you love. Thanks for watching. Bye.